Hi, welcome back to the Jeepster build. Well, as you can see, I've got the nose off the Jeepster, and I'm back to getting really dusty again. What I'm doing is I am finish sanding all of the filler, so I can get it ready for primer. As I mentioned in prior videos, I use a 40 grit to sand all my filler, especially when I'm putting on this much filler. I want to make quick use of sanding all this down and flattening out as quick as possible. And that's one thing that's nice with a really heavy grit on a long board. It does flatten out because it's so aggressive. And then I'll typically go to an 80 grit. Now if I was just doing spot filler, not doing a whole finish like this, I would do an 80 grit on the spot filler and then go to a 180. Well, since I did go so aggressive, I'm going from 40 to a 180. On the 180, I just want to flatten it out as much as possible and get as much of the deep scratch out. It's going to be a lot of work to get all of the scratch out, but it's not necessary. I just want to smooth it as much as possible, get rid of as much of the deep grit, and then I'll just use a high build primer. I'm going to put probably 4 coats of high build primer on all of these parts. And the reason why I removed them is I want to be able to do both sides. Probably do the doors too. The doors aren't quite ready, but I think I can knock that out real quick. Speaking of the door, I had a little rookie mistake. Should have known better. One of the things I've noticed on these doors, here I'll flip you around, I'll show you. So what I did when I lined this door up, I lined up this body line and made it perfectly in line so that when I put the trim on, it would also be in line. One of the things I've noticed on the Jeepsters when I've been going through all these different pictures and I'm coming up with different ideas on how I'm going to paint it in two-tone and blah blah blah, this trim very rarely meets. This trim is always lower than this trim. Pretty much on every car that I've looked at, except the really high-end builds. I mean, I've seen some really nice restored Jeepsters, and this trim is always off. And so lining this door up and really concentrating on getting this perfectly straight, I thought I was doing the right thing. And then I put on the trim and mine's off. Well, I'm noticing these holes are stamped on this panel about 1/8 of an inch higher than they're stamped on this panel. So this trim is about 1/8 of an inch off, even though this is perfectly straight. I know better than that. You know, put the trim on and you adjust the door with the trim if you want the trim to match. Same thing with this. Put the trim on if you want to adjust everything so that it matches. So sure enough, I had to adjust this door. After I had all of this so perfectly gapped and sanded and filled, I spent 2 hours adjusting this door to get this to line up. And then I had to go back and redo all the alignment on this. And then I had to re-drill my guide holes in my hinges to be able to get this all to line back up again. Yeah. Rookie mistake. Even though I've been doing this for many years and I worked in a hot rod shop, I know better and I still fell into that trap. Make sure, just put on the trim, make sure everything lines up, and then do your final work. At least I didn't have it in primer. If I would have had it in primer and then noticed that, and heaven forbid, all the way to paint, and I think that's what happens. People put that trim on and go, oh, whoops. And then they adjust the door to get the trim to work, and then the gaps are all off. Anyway, there you go. Learn from my mistake. It's a great learning tip. So one of the things I'm perfecting on this hood, I noticed when I had the hood on the car, and I got everything all finished along this side of the car, I walked around the other side and I'm looking at it, and the hood on that side comes to an abrupt 90-degree point. The hood on this side is round. Somebody screw up and weld that one or grind this one off. It was just the way it came from the manufacturer. When this hood skin was stamped, it was stamped with the edges that fold over. When it was crimped down and spot welded on, they had the whole thing adjusted off. So there was no metal here. And the way it crimped on the inside, there was no metal at the fold over on the crimp either. So there's a big gap on the back, and this was just missing metal. So I'd already finished it, so I had to grind all this filler off and weld this corner into a fine point, file it, grind it, get it all perfectly square on a 90-degree angle, and then I'm going back to refinish it. I put the first coat of filler on there, and I'm just a hair low, so I need to hit it with another coat. But I will keep sanding it just a little bit more before I put on that final outer coat. And then the same thing goes for the two fenders. Where the fender met to the front grill, one side fit just perfect, and the other side just didn't. It was obvious. Now, the driver's side is the one that was off. It's off in a way that if they were both off the same way, I wouldn't bother. I'd just stand back and look at them, and they look the same. But when one side was absolutely perfectly fitted, and the other side was just a little off, well, it was just noticeable. I kept debating on, do I really want to take the time to finish that and redo it? There's two things you got to do. I'll show you. One is you got to cut it and weld it, and the other is to just build it up with filler. So this is the area that meets up to the front grill, and it was tight at each bolt holes. And then there was a gap here and a gap here. So about the only thing you could do is to split the metal and force that up against the grill and then weld that back in, or fill it with filler. So what I did is I tapped these areas where the bolt holes are back as hard as I could and made it fit the grill as close as possible, and I still had about a 1/16 of an inch gap in between both. So what I did is I put masking tape on the grill, bolted this up tight, and just sucked these out again, and opened up these two gaps again. So then I took my filler and I just pressed it hard into those two gaps, and then it left that filler in between to fill that space. When I took it off, peel off that masking tape, and now I have just about a 1/16 of an inch buildup of filler right here, and about a 1/16 plus buildup right here. And that'll close that gap right up. Plus, this fender had a pretty big radius to it in the metal stamping. And the fender on the opposite side, which I'm pretty sure was off of a different vehicle because it's not the original fender to this car. I think the stamping was different on that because it had a crisp edge and this had a radiused edge. So I wanted to crisp this edge up too. So by building that up with filler, now I can sand it and crisp that up. And then mimic the same tight radius that was on the other fender. And then they'll match. Now I can look at the front end of it and go, yeah, it's perfect. Okay, now that I have this perfected, now I'll go back and sand everything with my 180 and get as much of that deep scratch out as I can. Alright, I've got the two parts epoxy mixed together. I've stirred it really good. Now, as they say, I'm going to just let it sit for 15 minutes and let the two get to know each other. Well, I thought I'd get this out of the way. I had put the high build primer on, and I used the Eastwood high build, the 2K. I really like the primer. It says it's ready to sand in 2 hours. It's been 2 days and it's still very difficult to sand. It just keeps clogging up the sandpaper. I did everything per the label. The only thing that I can figure is I put down an epoxy primer first as a base. Well, that's what a lot of people do, and I haven't seen any complaints. But I don't know how long they waited till the epoxy dried. According to the specs, a couple of hours. So that's what I did. Well, if I did get it sanded after 2 days, waiting for it to cure, and I've had really good luck with Rust-Oleum. And I wanted to do this in semi-gloss. I'm going to do all the inner fender wells and everything in semi-gloss. It's kind of a thing that I've always enjoyed doing, restoring cars. Rust-Oleum came out with a new spray nozzle. I think I got more on me than I did on the firewall. I don't know if it's just this can. This is the first time I've used it, if there was something defective, but I'm afraid to even use any of them. It's just making a huge mess. Fortunately, I wasn't doing the fender wells because it would have been dribbling all over the fender wells and I would have had to have sanded it all down or wipe it off. But yeah, Rust-Oleum, you blew it on this new tip. It has changing positions. You can change it to horizontal fan or a vertical fan or a high spray or a very low spray. I started out doing the horizontal spray. It really puts out a nice spray, and then all of a sudden it's just pouring out the lid. So I switched it to a different setting, and I got about half done and it started pouring out again. So I got a rag and got it all the paint out of the top of it and switched it to a different setting, started spraying, and it's just getting everywhere. So I'm going to try and get one more coat on it. I've got 2 coats. I'd like to have 3 coats. It is flowing out really beautiful. There's no runs, but it's so perfect with 2 coats. Yeah, I'll just leave it alone. Just take well enough as it is, and yeah, I think that's best. I think I better call it quits before I make a mess with this stuff. Luckily, I covered the engine. Alright, well, I've got some more body work to do on the back end of it, so I'm going to let this cure, and then we'll start tackling into some other areas. I gotta go get cleaned up.